Hello and welcome to NZGBC Plugged In, a monthly lunchtime webinar series brought to you by the New Zealand Green Building Council. This webinar series brings you ideas, insight and innovation for better buildings in New Zealand. This month we are pleased to have John Jamison from Inside Out talking to us about construction waste. John was the PM for designing our construction waste study and will be talking to us about the findings of this today. Before I hand over to John, however, a quick overview of the format for today. John will deliver his presentation in its entirety first, and then answer questions at the end. If you do have a question, though, you don't need to wait until the end of the presentation to submit it, but please make sure to do so via the question box, not the chat box. Okay, now here's John to talk to us about some things we can do to tackle the problem of construction waste in New Zealand.
Right, thanks for that. So the presentation today will describe the opportunity we have to work more efficiently and save money. We've got plenty of time for the session. The presentation won't take the full hour, and so I'm also happy to answer any questions you may have, as just was described. So let's get into it and start off. So if I first want to set the scene, I think that would be a good place to start. And if you look at the research that has been done about the amounts of construction waste that are made, if you like, or they are massive. So construction and demo waste accounts for up to 50% of all the waste in New Zealand, and that's 80% of the stuff going into clean fill and 20% into landfill. And if you look at some of the stats around what is actually happening to create that construction waste, but typically 15, but up to 48% of material used in the construction process is wasted. These are massive numbers and are pretty well researched in some cases. There's less research in the New Zealand construction sector, and we've been trying to fill some of those gaps with some of the study. But there is good experience from overseas. In some recent work that Cube out of AUT were involved in, they were doing some analysis about how much waste is costing us, if you like. So in the construction average house, which was at that stage around $28,000, so you can see it's probably about 18 months old, that number, about $100,000 of that budget is wasted. I mean, that includes the labour waste as well, but in there, $31,000 worth of material is wasted, and that's a great opportunity for us. The study itself was really focused on two construction materials. One of those was plasterboard and the other was timber. So if we focus on timber for a second and look at what is going on in that space. So in residential construction, if we focus on that, the predictions for waste, if you like, so what are the allowances for waste within a construction contract? It's usually 5 to 15%, depending on what the material is and what it's being used for. But when we actually look at the end and say, okay, well, if we back cost this, what actually happened? Typically, those waste rates that we see are 3 times higher. And when an average timber framed house is built in New Zealand, there's an average of 2,000 kgs of timber going to the tip or somewhere. And typically 10% of the ordered building materials are unused. So they're not even used, but they end up being disposed of at the end because they were there for some reason. The biggest prevalence of waste, or the causes of waste in building, are over-ordering and off-cuts. Off-cuts is pretty obvious. Not everything is going to be perfectly fitted, but over-ordering is something that can be controlled. And if you look from a designer's perspective, there was some research done by Innis that estimated 33% of on-site waste is due to an architect's failure to implement waste reduction measures during those design stages. So there is a lot of control that can be had. And if I think about timber in particular on building sites, especially residential building sites, it's typically seen as a consumable item. Much like a ream of copy paper in an office situation. You know, we can just order another pack and it'll just get used. So we start to look again at plasterboard. And typical, again, predictions for plasterboard in residential construction are around the 5 to 10% mark, but 17% for residential, and typically up to 48% is the actual measured wastage rates for plasterboard. 17% in simple residential group home builder type situations, where there has been some consideration may be taken. 48% in commercial projects and architecturally designed homes. But on average, if we think about timber being a 2 tonne of timber going to as waste, for plasterboard, that's more like 700 kilos, which seems an inordinate amount for something where we're only using 2 to 3 tonne of plasterboard for a house. Early stages of the study, we were talking with some plasterboard contractors, and we worked with them and ran a small case study. And what we wanted to do with the study is that we had 2 houses side by side, very similar in nature. If we actually took a careful approach as to how that timber, how that plasterboard was going to be fixed and how it was going to be ordered, would that make a difference? So what we found was that by changing that work method, the plasterboard waste was reduced by 30% with no actual changes in the design of the home, just how that material was measured off and ordered. And if we look at some of the other numbers around that, typically what's delivered to site over a range of types of projects is 1.46 times to 1.93 times what would actually be specified. So if you just did a straight takeoff off the plans and measured as that as 100% of the order, typically what ends up going to site is nearly 1.5 to 2 times that amount of material. And what we also found was, especially with GIB or plasterboard, is that over-ordering is typical, and especially where there's a disconnect between the fixer and the contractor buying the materials. There are good case studies locally around reducing waste. A whole lot of stuff that was done with Horvath Homes in Hawke's Bay, other studies in Auckland and in Christchurch, but most of these were focused on dealing with the waste and diverting it rather than reducing it. Those last 2 slides were really focused on residential construction, but if we look in the commercial construction space, we got involved with the Architectural Wall Claddings Institute, which is the contractor's body for all sorts of sheet cladding type products, whether they be external or internal. And I presented to their board at one stage in a way to challenge them to see what we could do. And disbelief was their reaction when I was presenting to them. I mean, absolute disbelief in some cases, to the point where one of their members went back to their organisation and said, no, I'm going to measure this closely. So what they did they ended up sharing it with us, which was great, was that they had a few commercial projects running at the time, and they took careful measurements about what was the site takeoff or the plans takeoff, what was ordered for site, what was actually then supplied to site, to see how those numbers lined up. And so typical, if we took 100 tonne as a baseline for this, so 100 tonne of material on the takeoff allowed 10% for their waste allowances. So they would order 110 tonne of plasterboard. And what they found was that when they did back cost it fully and looked at what waste that they produced, there was another 6.5 tonne of unbudgeted material. And if you have a look at, or you remember back to that previous slide when we were talking about plasterboard, talking about 17% and above, it's kind of bang on that number. And this was in a large commercial sense, so they had a lot of opportunities to reuse offcuts or other parts of those boards for other parts of the contract. I've just got a slight technical hitch here at the second. Cool.
That's right.
Thanks for that. Right. So what I'd like to do now is just actually talk about the study. So the study was a whole group of people who are interested in this space, and it was supported by the Canterbury Joint Waste Committee under the Christchurch Council, Auckland City Council, Waste Mins, AUT were very interested through their program that they have running there, Brands and Winstone Wallboards as a commercial partner from the actual, from an industry perspective. And it was also helped funded by the Ministry for the Environment. And the premise was, or the question we were posing was, is it feasible to reduce plasterboard and treated timber waste in construction by 20 to 30% by actions taken in the design of a building? Now, we define design as any planned action or step taken in delivery of a contract. So it's everything from the initial concept and feasibility of a project right through to the contractors on site, because they're taking planned actions and steps in delivering that project. So it's at any stage during that process, are we able to impact that to reduce the plasterboard and treated timber waste by 20 to 30%? So that was the question that we were posing, and we wanted to see whether that was feasible. And what we found was that we came up with what we ended up calling the waste management paradigm. And let me explain that. So how we think and how we perceive things is a frame of reference for how we view the whole situation. And what we found was that waste is someone else's responsibility. It's just a byproduct of our processes. It's an accepted outcome, if you like, that there will be waste. And that leads to, how do we then deal with that? So what are the decisions and actions around that? And the reaction is that we need a waste management industry to support the waste that we produce. And this then evokes shared attitudes and assumptions about how we deal with that. And that's what we call the waste management paradigm, because we now have a waste management culture which enables us to deal with this waste. And that shapes and reinforces what we think, that waste is someone else's responsibility. We have a very efficient waste management industry that enables us to, if you like, assume that everything is going swimmingly and that it's easily dealt with. And it's waste is a normal byproduct of construction. And because this waste management is sufficient, if you like, it becomes the best answer. And we get this circular thinking going on that there isn't a problem, which is, if I hark back to what I was talking about with the AWCI, disbelief, because there is a genuine lack of awareness about what is actually going on out there. So our challenge then, if we want to impact that, is to reframe the thinking around waste, especially in the construction industry. So what we have is starting to, if you like, talk about waste, raising the awareness, but we still have a large gap between that and what those actions might be. So what we needed to do was to build a roadmap that would enable us to reframe that thinking and give us a path that we could take. So we think about raising awareness as our first goal. If we think about the clients in a construction project, and it's raising awareness of what does happen during the construction process, and that they do have an ability to set targets and goals around waste. And if we think about designers, again, it's their awareness of the levels of waste that are produced, and the concept that there can be targets around that, and that things can be done to reduce the amount that could be produced. So some of the concepts that might be considered are elements of off-site construction, the ability to use standardized module sizes to reduce the amount of offcuts that will be required. Is there some modularization that could be occurred depending on what type of project you're looking at, that could be fully off-site manufactured and brought to site? Are there specification clauses that we could include in our specifications which deal with waste, which enable a focus on it and at least help raise the awareness? And is there anything we could do with contracts as we look to engage subcontractors and contractors to deliver the project? Are there clauses that we could use to help with that? And if we work down that chain to the contractors, again, it's around the awareness of how much waste is produced and what targets and goals that they could put in place. And then again, options for them to look at as they execute the project. Is there an opportunity to use BIM as part of the design process for the building? The utilisation on site of what's commonly now referred to as modern methods of construction, looking at off-site construction, utilising lean in the construction space, lean manufacturing principles, adopt those on site. Materials logistics plans, can we manage our suppliers and our materials flow to site, which would enable us to reduce the amount of waste that we produce. Site waste management plans, or as we might want to call them, site waste minimisation plans. Is there an opportunity there to at least then start to engage contractors in how much waste is produced by highlighting what is produced? Are there opportunities through purchasing, through site control? And then if I hark back to the measurement aspects of it again, can we do something more to actually identify how much waste is produced? And if I think of another example in the infrastructure space, though, not in vertical construction, but more horizontal construction, there was a large-scale project that was running at the time. And their site took an approach that they wanted to look at the application of lean on their site. And they did this quite successfully. Lean, one of the outcomes of lean is that you remove all waste, and waste is deemed to be anything that doesn't add value to the end customer, if you think about lean in a manufacturing sense. So they were looking to apply lean in a construction sense, so anything that didn't add value to their client in the end is waste. So what can we do to avoid it? So part of that was measuring. So they conducted an audit, and in 1 month they had identified that they had 14 linear kilometres of timber which was going into the bin. So they realised that this is probably not a smart thing to be doing, and they created an on-site store for unused materials so that they could be reused in other parts or just used if they were new somewhere else but were superfluous to what they'd actually been ordered for in the first place. So that's one small example of, as soon as you start to identify how much you do create, what that opportunity does deliver. They kept working through lean right through the project, and to the end they're actually almost upstreaming how the supplier was managing the supply of their products that they needed on site, to the point that I think the supplier's supplier was also being managed as part of that process. But creating those materials logistics plans really showed them what an opportunity they did have to reduce the waste. The second part of our project, after we investigated what was occurring and the research that we could find in that space, was to undertake some pilot projects. And these pilot projects were focused as much as we could across all forms of the construction sector. So there was some multi-unit residential, there was some commercial, a mix of everything that we could touch. In all those projects, we had a high level of engagement. And what I mean by high level, it's almost a double-edged thing too, or two-sided thing. We had high level engagement in terms that everybody was motivated because they thought it was a great opportunity. So there was a high level of engagement in that sense, but also a high level of engagement in that we were talking with the clients in a lot of cases and those at a higher level in the project. What we found though is that as we started to work with the project teams at a project team level, there was a little less so. They were engaged to the point that they were interested and wanted to be involved and could see the benefits, but because it wasn't a driver for their deliverable or aspect of what we were asking them to do, it wasn't a driver for them, it fell by the wayside. The focus was always on program and budget, and as soon as those projects hit any speed bumps which would impact their program timeline and budget, we were sidelined. And so it wasn't a great outcome, but it did provide some great learnings for us. And the challenge then was, how do we make this a priority to enable a different approach, so that we can then reframe that thinking that is there around that waste management paradigm. And this is essentially what we experienced. The guys were so busy that they couldn't stop to think about maybe there was a better way, and we see that all the time. So we ended up developing a logic map, and this outlines who benefits and how, and frames the issues and the attitudes that we're experiencing and the processes that are in place. And then what strategies and tools could we put in place or work on to try and change that situation. So it was about building that roadmap. And if we think about the attitudes, it's that lack of awareness and little interest immediately. The status quo is fine, is what we were hearing all the time. And there is no knowledge of what is happening. There is very little knowledge about how much is produced. And in the processes that we see, it's normal to overorder. There's no consideration to the efficient use of materials in design, typically. There's, do we use standard sheet sizes or module sizes? And what are the work methods and processes that lead to multiple offcuts? And rework is one of the biggest contributors to waste, and rework is there for many reasons. It could be about design, not clearly depicted, requiring that detail to be redone because it wasn't done correctly in the first place. A lot of it too is about flexibility as the contractor evolves and the client says, actually, I've changed my mind and I'd like to have this element over here now rather than over there. And sequencing has a lot to do with rework as well. So there's a trade that needs to be in before something happens and they don't get there for timing issues, requiring something to be pulled off or redone again because they need to come back and do their bit. So what can we do to make a change? So if we hark back to what we are doing, is it feasible to reduce construction waste by 20 to 30% through design? And the answer is a huge yes, absolutely. It's an easily achievable target in my view. We proved that particularly with that plasterboard case, just working with an on-site contractor. We achieved the target straight away. So yes, absolutely, it is possible to reduce construction waste by 20 to 30% through design. But there's a few barriers there. There is no demand for change. And that lack of awareness around the amounts of construction waste produced really leads to the unimportance, if you like, of addressing this. The construction industry is very busy. They're all pushing their barrows with square wheels. They don't have time to stop and think, is there a better way? When you do stop and think, is there a better way? There definitely is. That infrastructure project example is a great example of the savings they made and the value they actually delivered to that contractor. And I'm thinking for the period that when I was talking to them, I think they had made $82 million worth of savings in climbing as a result of the lean implementation. And not all of that's to do with materials waste, some of that's to do with labour. But materials was a big chunk of that. And then the last barrier is there's an industry focus on waste management. We're used to having waste efficiently dealt with. But despite the fact that we have those barriers, there's some great things that are underway already. And there's also an opportunity to do more. And if I think of some of the things that are underway, firstly, there's Callista, the green gorilla plasterboard timber collection recycling scheme in Auckland. So they're working with builders there to separate out waste so that they can actually reuse, recycle some of that waste. That does two things. One is obviously that stops those materials going into landfill directly or cleanfill. But the second thing is that it raises awareness with those builders that are using that service as to the amounts of waste that they're producing on site, particularly for those two products. There's a REBRI certification scheme underway in Christchurch, and hoping that there's going to be a national rollout of that. Now, REBRI is the resource efficient building stuff that Brands worked on a few years ago, and there's some great templates and tools available off the Brands website to help people produce waste plans, and also designing out waste at the front end of the process there. So what things can you consider at the front end of a project to eliminate some of that waste? And the REBRI certification scheme, what that's about is making it a condition of their consent, if you like, that they have to have REBRI certified processes in place, so that again enables the visibility of the waste that is produced. There's a MRF that's been set up in Auckland, a materials recycling facility. Waste Management have set that up again to start to divert waste streams, but again that'll flow upstream and develop some awareness about what waste is being produced. And if we think about some of the things that we can be doing, and I think one of the biggest things we can do is to develop some standard contract clauses covering resource efficiency and waste minimisation. So we think back to the beginning, we were talking about, what can a client do? Well, these clauses, if we had some in there about the consideration of waste in the design stage of the building, and then as that flows through to the contractors executing the project on site, what clauses can be in their contracts to enable that waste control, if you like. If there was a blanket-wide introduction or requirement to measure waste, that would be excellent, because then the awareness would be right in everybody's face. And in that space, there's a couple of things that I know that are underway. I think there's work going on in the Bay of Plenty, and there's also work going on in Auckland. That as part of a building consent issue, a condition of that would be that the requirement for a site waste management plan. And again, that may not necessarily mean that there'll be a reduction in waste, because the management plan, as I was cynically told, might just mean that our plan is that we intend to send it all to landfill. We know that's not a plan, so we should rename them site waste minimisation plans. Is that the awareness again will become eminently visible how much waste is produced from each site. We will also work all the way through a project to deliver a meaning. If we need to have a case study where we start at the very beginning with the concept and a client who's got an idea or a requirement or a need, work all the way through that project, and at every stage consider waste and the minimisation of waste through the design and execution of the project, so that I'm sure we'll get some great learnings out of that, and hopefully start to chip the edges off those square wheels. The other thing that's been underway in industry is this drive towards raising the productivity of the construction sector. And if you think about productivity, it's about doing things more efficiently as you do things. And if we can ride on the coattails of this productivity improvement, waste reduction is an outcome of that. If you're working more productively, you are saving time, and if you are doing it more efficiently, you would end up saving materials. So if you think about the things that are being talked about in terms of raising productivity, there's off-site construction. And if you think back to timber, when the timber frame from the frame and truss manufacturers are delivered to site, there's a huge gap between the efficiencies that they achieve in their off-site construction, deliver those frames to site, and then the building is executed The waste rates from within frame and truss plants are typically in the order of 2%. And you can see that's a far cry from the amounts of waste we get when those frames hit site. So if we can do more in an off-site construction, that will allow us to work more efficiently as well, raising productivity but also reducing waste. So we come right round to the beginning again and back to our study, which was, is it feasible to reduce plasterboard and treated timber waste? And yes, it is. So I'd just like to conclude with a thanks to the group that was instrumental in setting up the project, and the Canterbury Joint Waste Committee, Auckland Council, Wasteman's, AUT Brands and Winstow Wallboards, and obviously wouldn't have happened without the huge support for the Ministry for the Environment as well. So I'm more than happy to take some questions that may have come through and see if I can answer those for you.
Yes, thank you very much, James. John, that was really interesting. We do have a couple of questions. Everyone out there, please feel free to put your question into the question box, and we have now a few minutes to answer those questions. So the first question was there any measurable difference to program during the PB case study?
Yeah, so there was a measurable difference to program, but it wasn't significant. So what happened to actually take that different work method, if you like, and that procedure, it added approximately 45 minutes to the program, which is not considerable at all, and was more than offset by the 30% reduction in waste that was seen as a result of doing that. So yeah, there was some slight impact there, but the impact was more than offset. And to the point where that contractor has now made that their standard work method. So they've changed their processes to make that their standard process. So it's obviously valuable for them.
Great, the next question. Much like the implementation of BIM, shouldn't the focus be on client's principles in the first instance, as opposed to the contractor? Client's principals need to be aware of the benefits as well as the cost to implement at the front end in design and the construction contact prior to attempting the implement with the contractor, who will push back even though there are obvious benefits for them, and particularly long term.
Yeah, within the construction sector, obviously there's a lot of complex relationships that go on, and you have to be aware of who's benefiting by the introduction of what and why. And there has to be a clear value proposition for everybody in the chain, if you like, from the client right through to the contractor. And there has to be clear about who's benefiting by how and how much. And yep, totally agree with you. If we get back to lean, if it's not providing value for the customer or the client, it's waste, if you like. So there has to be some value derived all the way down that chain for something to be successful.
Another question, can you advise, was the waste sorted on-site or off-site?
It depends. So there was a mix of both. So I think about the green gorilla stuff going on in Auckland. That's actually sorted on site. So they have a separate, well, it's not a bin. It's actually a flexi bag for the plasterboard waste, and a separate one for the treated timber. So that's sorted on site. On site sorting is difficult at times because there is very little space at times, especially on a residential construction site, for that to happen. It is possible, and there has been some great work done to make that a work method, if you like. If you think about other offers now, the waste management MRF in Auckland, I think that's based on mixed. So they actually sort when they get back to the materials recycling facility. So that's I can't remember the technical term, but a mixed bin, if you like, goes to site and then gets sorted. So yeah, it varies, depends.
Okay, next question. Why would Wimstone wallboards support an initiative that would essentially seek to reduce the amount of product they would sell?
Great question, but I don't work for Wimstone wallboards. No, I think if I think to why they might be involved in a study such as this, they just want the job done better, and they want to provide value for their clients and customers in the long run. So if you think about that plasterboard manufacturer, or they've plasterboard contractor, they've now got a better work method which will enable them to be more successful in their market as well, I'm sure. So it's about doing a better job. So I think that's why they're involved.
Cool. And another question here. We are in the process of designing our first house. I would love to get my contractor involved in a delivery plan. Is it relatively self-explanatory? Can an average Joe like myself manage and run this process?
Yes, I would say if you are interested, absolutely. And like I said, there's a lot of Rebury resources up on the brand's website that you can download and use, and that's, you know, templates for site waste management plans. It's considerations taken in the design of your new house, which will be exciting for you anyway, and so I'm sure you'll be into that. And it's just things that you can consider as you work through those various stages of your contract. So yeah, for sure, you can get involved.
And another one here. Does the plasterboard recycled get reused?
Yes. They have a recycling plant in Auckland where they chip it up, for want of a better word, and separate out the paper product from the gypsum product, and then they reuse the gypsum in other areas such as fertiliser inputs or whatever they need to do, and then obviously the paper is recycled.
Great, thank you. Is there any other questions? Otherwise we will wrap up here now and end the webinar. Oh no, we've got another one come through. Will NZGBC be looking to government departments to act as examples for this process?
Yeah, that would be my. I would love that to happen as well. But obviously, government, especially, to look as exemplars in the way that they commission projects, if you like, and things and targets that they could be putting out front. And that was one of the things we talked to them about as well through the Ministry for the Environment. So we'll see where that leads.
Great. Okay, well that's it from us. If you have any other questions or would like to see the presentation again, it will be available on our website, or email us if you have any questions for John or for NZGBC under education@nzgbc.org.nz. And we will be back in a month's time on the 30th. So we're not back on the Wednesday. We're back on the Thursday. We're launching our new rating tool, Green Star Performance, on the 29th. Therefore, we're shifting the webinar a day after, on the 30th. So tune in and sign up for that if you're interested. And we'll see you then. Thank you very much. Thanks, John.
Thank you.